Back in the 1990s, making basically anything more or less required you had a mascot of some sort. This was especially true for video games, and this makes sense. Mascots create a sort of brand identity. Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, Capcom had Mega Man, Sony had Crash Bandicoot, really, the list goes on. Arguably one of the most popular genres of the 8 and 16-bit eras was that of the mascot platformer. The mascot with attitude character archetype became sort of a dime a dozen. While most have long since faded into obscurity, one that has endured is Bubsy the Bobcat. Created by the late Michael Berlin, Bubsy the Bobcat is notable among the many mascot platformers of the decade for seeing something of a resurgence in recent years. This was likely due in no small part to Bubsy's prevalence among memes and internet culture. There is, after all, no such thing as bad publicity. That's not to say Bubsy was particularly hated from the start, quite the contrary. If anything, reviews for the first Bubsy game were quite positive. And that is what we are looking at today. The game was released for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, and while I physically only own the Sega Genesis version, there is the officially released Bubsy 2fer on Steam. SNES ROMs are the first two Bubsy titles, which will be the basis for this video, if nothing else for the superior audio quality. Bubsy is part of a long lineage of games that goes as far back as 1981, when Michael Berlin was making text-based adventure games. Things, however, would take a turn in 1991. Sonic the Hedgehog created a pretty significant seismic shift in the industry. Berlin would be one of many people who would try to replicate Sega's success with their new mascot, and getting his spin on the idea would prove to be a pretty uphill battle in of itself. Berlin would go on to play Sonic for over 10 hours a day, being tasked to write an essay on what made it a great game before he could begin production on his game. Clearly, something paid off, and production of Bubsy would begin in 1991 and culminate in 1993. This wasn't a low-effort release either. Bubsy had quite the aggressive marketing campaign, the game releasing with a full comic to tell the game's story, a fully produced cartoon pilot, and several magazine ads in prolific magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly. Accolade had a lot riding on launching Bubsy successfully, and in a way, they did certainly succeed. But, from another angle, Bubsy failed spectacularly. While reviews for the game did lean positive at the time, and Bubsy did take home a few awards, there were also quite a few detractors from the word go, a trend that seems to have only gotten worse for the ill-fated Bobcat with the rise of the internet and video game commentary as a form of entertainment, in which Bubsy has often found himself as the butt of the joke. And we're just talking about the first game here, mind you. This is to say nothing for the rest of the Bubsy franchise, but those are tales for another time. Bubsy, much like Sonic, was just oozing attitude.
What could possibly go wrong?
Although, in the case of Bubsy, it was less an irreverent 90s teenager, and more the talkative friend who is sure to always let you know exactly what he's thinking at any given moment.
To Mr. Basket Case, it's me, the Prince of Personality, Bubsy!
Unfortunately, unlike Sonic staring at you and motioning you to get moving, Bubsy's quips quickly lose their charm and become far more grating than endearing.
Well, are you still playing this thing?
Which is a rather large problem if you're trying to sell me on a character's personality. The wisecracks and punny nature drove a lot of what Bubsy is. Bubsy is a bobcat, and thus collects yarn balls, protecting Earth from the invading aliens, the Woolies, led by Polly and Esther. Did you find those jokes amusing? Well, your mileage of how much you enjoy Bubsy as a character, least of all on a conceptual level, will vary depending on your answer. Bubsy has a personality for sure. It's distinct. It's just that if it weren't for that aggressive marketing campaign, he would have been lost to the sands of time. Gone the way of Cool Spot or Awesome Possum. Turning on the game, that bouncy, upbeat jazz music doesn't quite prepare you for what's to come. It's hard to complain about the music too much though. That is some nice music, even with the Genesis twang. Bubsy, from a certain angle, is pretty bog standard as far as mascot platformers go. You run through different colorful levels, collect different items, jump on enemies, and clear the stage. Bubsy, however, from another angle, takes quite the unforgiving approach to you trying to play the game. If you're familiar with other platformers that Bubsy tries to imitate, namely Sonic, the general rule is, as long as you have at least one ring on you, you can tank just about anything. Different rules apply to different games, of course, but with Bubsy, no matter how many collectibles you have, one hit will always instantly kill you, and sometimes learning what counts as a hit comes all too late. Bubsy even has some rather unorthodox controls. In your average platformer, your controls will consist of a jump button, maybe an attack button, sometimes a run button. This one, however, does things rather differently. When standing still, one button will be dedicated to panning around the camera to get a better view of your surroundings, one dedicated to a short hop, and another dedicated to a higher jump. Conversely, when on the move, one button is effectively useless, and both buttons will allow you to jump, and when in the air, glide to slow your descent and negate fall damage. That is, if you're playing the Genesis version. Things are both a bit simpler and a bit more complicated on the SNES version, with the camera panning feature being mapped to the shoulder buttons, and the face buttons being dedicated to the short jump and the high jump. The short jump is about as useful as it sounds, in that there's never any real practical application to it. At the very least, I never found any situations in which it was preferable to just the regular jump. Bubsy is also quite the speedster. He can move so fast, in fact, that you will almost certainly bump into something you didn't see coming in time. What makes this even more baffling, aside from having exactly one hit before you die, is the 10-minute time limit on every level. These levels can be rather large and expansive, so it feels like a conflict of ideas. On one end, the time limit and Bubsy's speed brings to mind the original Sonic the Hedgehog titles, in which you are expected to blow through as quickly as you possibly can, but at the opposite end of the spectrum, the sheer scope of these levels and the one-hit death gives the impression that they want you to slow down, take your time, and really explore every nook and cranny. It's a very confusing game, to say the least. At 16 chapters, it is, in theory, about as long as your standard platformer of the era. All these things compounded, however, will make it feel significantly longer than that. All this to say that Bubsy can be a difficult game, but is very rarely a game that feels difficult for the right reasons, least of all rewarding. While 16 chapters sounds like a fair bit of content, they are thematically and visually not as distinct as you would hope. While 16 chapters sounds like a fair bit of content, they are thematically and visually not as distinct as you would hope. Many of them feel questionably similar, enough that you could mistake them for just being the same levels. Time and time again, Bubsy proves to be a simply exhausting experience that even the most dedicated of players will find to be a slog. With Accolade having gone under years and years ago, the fact that Bubsy was revived at all through a long series of acquisitions and buyouts is sort of a miracle, so I wouldn't bet the farm on seeing him again. But hey, the fact that he was revived at all must mean someone behind the scenes is fighting to get more Bubsy into our lives. Whether that's for better or worse, well, I'll let you decide. To be honest, I was hoping to find more positive things to say about this game going in. Michael Berlin went through the ringer and had to repeatedly see himself and his creation trashed. And the last thing the world needs right now is to have that piled on. In spite of all this, I don't hate Bubsy. Not entirely, at least. Not as deeply as some others seem to. I think there is a lot of potential to the character. And I'm not just saying that out of pity. Clearly, someone agrees. Because after 21 years of dormancy, the franchise was revived to mixed reviews. The most recent title in the series released 4 years ago as of writing. So, time will tell what the future holds for the little furball. In the meantime, thanks for watching this little video. I found myself with a lot more to say and a lot less to say than I originally thought I would, and this is my first time in quite a while trying out long-form content like this, so I'm really not sure how this turned out, but again, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, why not leave a like and comment, and if you want to see more, why not hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell to be notified of all future uploads. Special thanks to JLuisJoni for his invaluable help with the thumbnail. Without him, it would not look nearly as good as it does. If you're into Sonic or Dragon Ball, there aren't many people better to check out. He does a lot of cool things you're likely to enjoy, so if you enjoyed what you saw on that front, be sure to check him out. But regardless of all that, thanks for watching.